Any other questions?
Steve,
No.
I don't know where I heard this, or where I read it, or whatever, but once you filed for ERISA, does that now protect us from any cuts until they make a decision?
I'm gonna answer that like a lawyer. So what I'm going to tell you on that is, first I'm going to tell you, ERISA or not, I was not contemplating making any cuts at this time. With regard to the specific answer to your question, I am going to comply with ERISA. I am not going to deviate from compliance with ERISA. As I sit here today, although I would need to get very formal advice on this and do specific research, it is my opinion that making a cut without getting the permission of all of the participants or the federal agencies would not be permissible under ERISA. So whatever ERISA requires, I will comply with. I won't do what it says I can't do, and I will do what it says I must do. And to the extent that there is anything precluding me from making a cut, then that compliance will be adhered to just as much as anything else. Okay?
If ERISA does not accept us, do we get the premium back?
That's a very good question as well. Likely yes. The question is if we are not, if it's determined that it's not an ERISA plan and we're not covered, do we get the premium that I paid back, which was, I think Go Local reported it as $1 million. I'm here to tell you it was slightly above 1.5. I believe 1.535. Is that what the 1.535? The other thing I will let you know, I can tell you right now, I could show you my wallet. I don't have it, but the valuation of the plan under ERISA. Now, keep in mind, under ERISA, you're required to make annual contributions to support the plan. Those are recommended contributions under a church plan status, but they are required contributions under an ERISA plan. The valuation that was prepared and that was sent to the federal agencies identified that the contribution that I need to make by October for this plan is slightly above $10.3 million for the year. If I had it, I would put it in like that. I don't have it. So I am speaking with my experts down in Washington, D.C. I do have a plan on how I'm going to address that. I don't want to divulge it here because I do know that the defendants do watch these videos and listen to what I say because they've quoted me in certain pleadings on it. So I'm not going to let you know what my thought process is or what those experts have indicated might be the way to go on that. But as I stand here right now, the election is requiring me to make a $10.3+ million contribution to this plan.
So where is that money coming from?
I can't answer that question. Well, I'll say this. We have the Judge Smith has set down the CCF settlement for final approval on August 29th. That's $4.5 million, less fees, costs, things like that. Just so you know, and I want everybody, I should have said this in my introductory comments, once final approval happens, that does not mean that I get a check from CCF or the Rhode Island Foundation, whoever's holding the money. What has to happen is there's an appeal period that must pass, which is about 20 days. And then that money, the CCF money that we've negotiated the settlement with, was subject to an order in the Superior Court in connection with the 2014 transaction, an order called a Cypre order. You've probably heard about it. So once final approval happens, assuming it does, final approval happens of the CCF settlement, and the appeals period expires for that, that's going to require me to go back to Judge Stern and say that order that you entered back in 14-15 we either need it to go away or it needs to be modified. And at that time, a party who is not involved in the federal litigation, but is involved in the receivership and that Cypre, being the Attorney General's office, will have to weigh in on whether or not they consent to it or want to argue that it shouldn't happen or anything like that. I cannot hold the Attorney General to any position right now, because they have not taken a formal position. But my preliminary discussions, both at the time that we first raised the Cypre under the old Attorney General, and my subsequent conversations with that office under the new Attorney General, are that under the terms of the settlement, they will not stand in the way. So I'm not expecting a problem, but there's a long road between now and, call it, mid-September. A lot of weeks between now and then. A lot can happen between now and then. So as I stand here today, once we get final approval, other than having to wait for certain deadlines to pass, I don't see much of an obstacle in getting the funds in, and that's approximately a little bit less than half of what I need. And the intention is that that's going to go into the plan anyway. So it's not like that was intended to go someplace else and now I'll get it and I'll put it in the plan. It was going there anyway. So some of the money will come from there. And then I've got some ideas rattling around in here that may try to move things off the block a little bit to get a little bit more.
Aren't we waiting on 11.5 million also?
We're waiting for approximately 11.5 on the old St. Joe's Roger Williams CCCB settlement. That has received preliminary approval, and we are waiting for final approval on that. Nothing has been scheduled for final approval on that one. And that piece also involves that 15% interest that I told you about. So there's...
And the whole thing can't be settled until the 15%?
Correct. Until either there's an agreement by the parties or we litigate that piece and resolve that piece.
I'll be pushing up daisies at that point.
I hope not.
The rate it's going.
Any other questions? Yes. Ken. I'm sorry.
I'm confused on the 15%. It's valued at a certain amount.
Yep.
Say $20 million. Will we get a cash payment for $20 million, or what is that value to us?
So the question is, and Ken, if I'm not repeating your question properly, please correct me. The question is the value of that 15%. It is something. Maybe we're not completely sure. We'll talk about what I do know about it, but we're not sure today. I think the question is once that gets determined, does that come in, or what happens to it? Okay, so that 15%, and I'm going to simplify it as much as I possibly can because it is a complicated transaction. In 2014, and I'm not going to get into the details of what I think is how they came up with this value, but the 15% was valued at approximately $16 million. We know that because the LLC agreement, which the 15% was part of, had a schedule which identified the prospect entities 85% and the CCCB's 15%, and said that that 15% was worth 16 and that the prospect piece was worth about 84. So, but basically put the value of the hospital at that time somewhere in the vicinity of $101 million. I don't know if that's what it's worth today. Could be more, could be less. A couple of things I do know. That's what they said it was worth in 2014. And the other thing that I know is that when they came up with those percentages, that contemplated, if you recall, you've heard, you've seen in the lawsuit, that Prospect had promised to put $50 million in over a period of time in terms of capital contributions to the hospital. That calculation and that percentage breakdown contemplated that they put the entire $50 million in. As I sit here today, I don't believe they did. So the question is, is there a larger percentage that CCCB holds? It's not going to be less than 15, but it could be more than 15. And then the question is it better to own 15% of a hospital worth $150 million or is it better to own 21% of a hospital worth $120 million? I'm a lawyer, so I'm not going to do that math up here in my head. But that's kind of the analysis. Now, the other issue with that in terms of when's that money, how's it going to get determined, and what's going to happen with it? So CCCB, under the LLC agreement, has what's called a put option. They have to decide whether or not they want to stay in the LLC or liquidate their 15% interest and get out. That had to be exercised originally between June 1st and September 1st, or September 15th was one of those two dates. Because of everything that's been going on, we've agreed with Prospect that we're going to shift all of that 90 days. So now the put option, the exercise of the put, isn't going to happen until September 1st. It's not going to start until September 1st. And the reason for that is CCCB was not comfortable, and I agreed, in making that put option or not until we knew actually what the 15% was worth. You want to know what you're saying, let me liquidate or not, once you know what it's worth. Once we know what the value is, assuming it is 16 million or better, we will have to confer with CCCB. I don't know, but let's use the scenario that we decide we're going to exercise the put option and we're going to ask for that interest to be liquidated. That money, if it is done before the settlement is finalized, will basically be converted from an assignment of an interest to an additional cash portion of that settlement, and that will come in. If it happens afterwards, then that money will come over to the plan, subject to any restrictions in the settlement agreement and restrictions on the valuation and anything like that. So the long answer to your question, Ken, is that ultimately that money will come into the plan. Whether it comes directly to me because CCCB is gone and I've taken over the valuation piece, or whether it comes through CCCB in a final approval of the settlement is what remains to be seen. But ultimately, if we resolve the issue among ourselves, or if Prospect is wrong or is determined to be wrong, that CCCB couldn't assign that interest to me, then we'll be getting the money. Okay? I know it was a kind of a long trip. I enjoyed it. I hope you did. Any other questions? No other questions? Anyone? Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you. So obviously we're going to keep doing these. This one I wanted to have, we usually do these on Mondays, but the Rhodes was unavailable this Monday, so we had to push it to Wednesday. But I wanted to make sure I had it this week because the mediation just got done, and I felt you guys deserved to know as quickly as possible what happened in that mediation, or as the case might be here, what didn't happen in that mediation. But I am at least happy to say that since our last meeting, which was just about a month ago, there's been a lot. If you remember, I started the last meeting with there hasn't been much that's happened. This past 30 days, there's been a lot that's happened. And I would say that with few qualifications, I view it all as positive. Sitting down with the parties and starting mediation, positive. Getting the CCF settlement preliminary approved with a date for final approval, very positive. The election, I view as positive. There are a lot of unknowns tied to all of these, but each one of those steps I view as a step that none of those steps will hurt the plan. Every single one of them can provide a benefit, and in some instances a very substantial benefit. So I'm hoping for the benefits to be realized, and we're just going to continue plowing forward with all of this. I know it's a long slog. As lawyers, I will tell you, we sometimes lose sight of the time. I think Julie can agree with me that, you come into a case and you blink your eyes and all of a sudden it's 2 years, 3 years down the road and you feel like you just started it. For you guys, I understand that feeling is not shared. So I do understand that. I do appreciate it. I will tell you that the judges are very aware, and they are moving things along at what they feel is the most appropriate pace. I truly believe it was a very good idea for the judges to strongly suggest that we mediate, not order it, but strongly suggest that we mediate, because if nothing else, it got everybody in the same place at one time, everybody. Before it was little splinters of groups talking. This got everybody in the same place at one time, and even more importantly, it got an independent individual, this gentleman from New York, to sit down and to have a very candid, frank discussion with each group and give his opinion on their thoughts in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of their case and liability and damages and all of that. And you can't underestimate the value of an independent party like that coming in who you understands what's going on and has a very good demeanor and thought process, and have that person say to you, and it's happened to me in mediation, this isn't as good as you think it is. Or, that's actually a pretty good argument. I'm buying that one. It helps to frame it for you, and most importantly, everybody. It wasn't just the lawyers there, it was people with authority. So Angel had people who had authority to make decisions there. The diocese had people who had authority to make a decision right then and there. If there was an offer that came in, they'd be able to say, yes, we will do that, and they wouldn't have to say, oh wait, we got to go back and talk to this person or that person. The people that were there had designated authority to make a decision, and they heard what the independent third party was saying, me included. So it's never a bad thing to have that happen. It actually makes people stop and think a little bit.
If the mediation is successful in 3 to 5 months, do you still continue with the ERISA process?
My quick answer to that is yes. 2 separate paths. The only way, in my opinion, the only way that we are under ERISA now, so the ERISA process, this is an ERISA plan as of right now, and I can't revoke my voluntary designation as an ERISA plan or request to be treated as an ERISA plan. So going forward, this is an ERISA plan and must comply with ERISA. The only way the PBGC doesn't come into play, in my opinion, is either if there is a decision made where we are told they don't come into play and they don't cover it, or if the resolution of the litigation and mediation and everything else results in a situation where this plan is protected. So if the plan is protected, it's just if you don't get into a car accident, you don't need to call in a claim. If you have a plan that has sufficient cash to run the length of time that is necessary to pay out all benefits, then you don't need to call up the PBGC and say, come in and bail us out. Come in and protect this plan as a distressed entity. So, and the more money that results from the litigation or the mediation or anything like that, obviously, you know, if the plan is funded 100% today, $1 out tomorrow means it's not funded 100%. But if we get a successful result, whatever that means, in the litigation or mediation, and the plan is funded 180% as of the date that that money comes in, a discussion with the PBGC won't happen until we get to a point where the plan is now below 100% again, because now you're fully funded and then some, and there's no distress. And the market could go down to 1% rate of return as much as it can go up to 11 or 12%. And so with that much money and with the volatility of markets and whatnot, your prediction of a 5.4% rate of return is what we're predicting now. You might actually get 7% and then actually be in a better position than you thought you would. So if we resolve it and we get a good amount of money in on that, that changes the dynamic of when we would need to call, and if we would need to call in the PBGC for any type of distressed status or treatment.
I think one of the things that has frustrated me as well as a lot of other people is the constant continuances that are going on in court. And I know it's important for us to be there in the courtroom when all this litigation is going on. But if we find out the day before, we can't be there because we have to get a bus and notify people, etc. So I'm hoping that the attorneys and the judges understand that we can't always be there.
No, and I understand that, the judge understands that. Unfortunately, that's kind of a function of the legal process. And what I can tell you is that the reason for 95% of the continuances, there have been instances where the judge has said, I can't hear this that day, I need it moved off. That's happened. But most of them, other than the ones where the judge has said move it on to a different date, are because the parties are behind the scenes trying to negotiate something that would eliminate even the need for the hearing in the first place. And so the judge always wants the parties to try to resolve it without having to waste the time, the court's time, to actually go argue it. In the instance of the prospect motion, we were trying to avoid that altogether. That's the standstill was stand still, don't do anything. When we finally got to terms of the standstill that worked for everybody, one thing Prospect wanted was, well, we want to go forward with that hearing. We won't do anything on it, but we still want to go forward with it. So that became kind of a, okay, it's already been briefed, it's already been responded to, let's just have the hearing, and the judge set it down on a very quick turnaround because it was just, let's get that piece out of the way so that we can move forward on the mediation and on everything else. So it is absolutely beneficial on however you look at that to have you at court showing the judge your faces, showing the judge that this is affecting real people. He knows it. Don't think for a second that he's lost sight of it. He has not at all. Neither judge has. But it's important. In fact, it's more important, I think, for the litigants to see it, to see for Prospect, for the diocese, for Angel, for Max and his team, to see that what's going on here is affecting real people. And that when you are there, there's also an acknowledgement that it's not easy for you to be there. When I'm in court, that's my job. I'm working. So when I'm in court, it's because I'm working. When you guys are in court, many of you are taking work off so that you can come in, and that isn't lost. It's not lost. And I try to get as much notice to you as possible so that you have that lead time. But like I said, sometimes with the back and forth, I mean, this motion of Prospects was filed in January. I think it was filed in January. And it was continued multiple times because we were really trying to avoid having the hearing. Both sides, not, Prospect was saying, we don't want to have the hearing if we can come to terms to an agreement. So everybody was trying to do it. It was being discussed during the day. It was being discussed at nights, on weekends. It was constantly, different versions were getting passed back and forth. There were conferences because people got to the point where they said, the heck with it, where we can't come to an agreement. You have a conference with the judge says something, the parties start to talk a little bit calmer again, and then everybody goes back to the drawing board to try to see if they can do it again. So it's all in an attempt to not waste the court's time with things that the parties can come to an agreement on their own.
I don't think any of us realized that we just thought it was, delay, hoping that more of us will die. That was my
No. I can tell you if there is a continuance, unless it is the judge ordering it, if there is a continuance, it generally has to be consented to by me or on the federal side by Max on behalf. And I can tell you that I'm not looking for that. So even though that may be Prospect's motivation, or
the other guys.
I'm not going to speak to their motivation, but if it is, I have to consent to it. And when I consent to it, it's because it's not my motivation to delay it in any way other than to hope that something positive will come from the delay that'll get settled. Even if it's one issue being settled and not having to spend 2-3 hours in court, never mind the 5, 6, and 7 hours of briefing the issue and reading is worth the price of admission to not have to go.
I'm definitely taking my law boards when this is over.
There you go. Let me tell you, don't go into this profession. It's not a good one. That is true. That is true. Julie just reminded me, even the judges' continuance lately have been last minute. I will tell you that the Judge Stern continued the prospect hearing once on his own, and I will tell you that that happened because it was scheduled and it was set down for hearing. Then Judge Smith in the federal court said, I want a conference on what's going on here. He called up Judge Stern and said, I want a conference, and I think it's a good idea for you to be there as well. And they talked about what that conference would be. And then Judge Stern said, you know something? I'm not going to hear that argument until we have this conference. I want that argument pushed off until after the conference. And so it was a last-minute continuance of it because Judge Stern didn't want to go into that before the conference because he felt the conference could resolve some things. So that's why that happened. So there's always, although some parties' motivation may be to just delay, there's always a reason behind the scenes as to why it's being done, and it's 99% of the time, when it's the parties continuing, it's because the parties are trying to work something out to avoid a hearing. Any other questions? All right, everybody, have a great night. The weather started to get warmer, so enjoy, drive safely. See you soon.